So it's on brand for me that I don't usually keep you too long in my sermons. I'm usually pretty quick. Writing today's sermon presented a challenge where I felt like I was supposed to go longer, and then I remembered, if the point's made, the point's made. So we're going to get out of here early. Today's passage is, of course, talking about Thomas the Doubter. That's where the central piece is. There's other pieces, and we can talk about those if we want to, but I'm focusing today on Thomas the Doubter. And the story of how Jesus appears to the disciples. Thomas isn't there. A week later, he appears to Thomas. He helps him overcome his doubts, and Thomas believes. Pause. Sidebar. It's not a sermon from Fenix unless there's a sidebar in it. Before we go anywhere at all with this passage, we're going to back all the way up, and we're going to do some background work. Phil likes it when I give historical context. Now, those of you who are familiar with your New Testament are likely aware that the Gospel of John, the 3 letters of John, and the book of Revelation are all attributed to the same author, the Apostle John, son of Zebedee, once called a son of thunder with his brother James. Now, modern scholarship has challenged this, and for about 120 years now, there's been an ongoing debate about the actual authorship of these works. There it is. That is the oldest piece of the Bible, a fragment of papyrus, dated to somewhere around 100 to 150 AD, in that range. This fragment contains a piece of John chapter 18. It is the oldest piece of archaeological evidence we have for when roughly the scriptures might have been written. So, did John write this? Here's another follow-up question. Does that matter? And my argument is that it does, at least a little bit. Because there's a difference between eyewitness testimony and something shaped by a community over time. There's not a difference in the value of the work, but there is a difference in how we understand what the text is doing. Many scholars believe that this gospel reflects not just one voice, but a community. Followers of John, a Johannine community, writing and refining these stories near the end of the first century. The Apostle John might well have been involved himself as well, but the community appears to have been it. Now, who was the Johannine community? I'm boring you now, but stay with me. It gets interesting. It's a mixture of Jewish and non-Jewish believers throughout the Roman Empire. Now, if you understand nothing else about this community, please understand this. They had been, at this point, excommunicated from the synagogues for believing that Jesus was the Messiah. And the Roman Empire had just started figuring out that this was not a sect within Judaism, but an entirely separate religion that claimed that Jesus, and not Caesar, was king. Two powers are pressing in on the community that writes this gospel. On the one side, they're being persecuted and ostracized for believing in Jesus, which is heresy against Moses. On the other side, you have a state government that is executing them for treason against the emperor. That means this gospel is not just a record of events. It's not a record of events at all. It's a testimony of faith, shaped in a particular, very specific historical moment. And this matters, because we live in a world where the Bible is still used, not just to inspire faith and resilience in the face of overwhelming power wielded against you, but sometimes to support power, ideology, and certainty of a kind that leaves no room for questions. The gospel tells us why it was written right in the passage before us today. Verse 30, 31. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So when these heavily persecuted people speak about belief and life. It's not about control. It's about hope. So let's bring this to Thomas. Doubting Thomas. Thomas the doubter. Has any apostle been the subject of more character assassinations than this man? Doubting Thomas? Thomas the doubter? Imagine being remembered for what people say is your worst moment ever. Doubting Thomas? Well, over here we have overreacting Peter. Ran away at the crucifixion James. Honestly, I thought it was a good idea, Judas. Or a modern example, shaving my beard off will look great, Fenix. It was years ago. It'll never happen again. I look like a sprig of asparagus. In response to the jubilant declaration of 10 disciples about a risen Jesus, Thomas responds cynically, "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." At first glance, it sounds like faithlessness. Hold on. Thomas was with Jesus right up until his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. He watched Judas, a friend that he loved, betray his master and fled the scene with the other 10 who were there. He wasn't privy to Mary's discovery of the empty tomb. He wasn't privy to the visit with the 10, and now he is approached by the 10 and told that the person he loved and followed was alive. Likely, he had seen death before. He knows what grief is. He knows that sometimes when someone you love dies, you see their face in a crowd. Or for a second, you recognize them in a random passerby. Sometimes you feel their presence in some intangible way. Jesus is alive? I'm sorry, guys. I know you're grieving. I know this is hard. This will pass in time. You'll heal. We all will. In the face of insistence, he pushes back. He loves these people. They cannot bury themselves in denial, the first stage of grief. They need to face this. The only way out of grief is through. And Thomas knows that. Show me the marks on a revivified body. Let me put my hand in his side where the wound is. Prove it. You can't. He's dead. I'm sorry. Thomas isn't cynical. He's reasonable. He's compassionate. He's grieving. And he's with his friends that he's convinced are also grieving. Patience, Thomas. They'll get there. Just be with them. Now, in our narrative, Jesus appears to Thomas and satisfies him. Thomas, faced with actual, empirical proof, kneels before Jesus and worships him as God. And too often we condemn him for needing that, even though in our text, Jesus himself doesn't shame him. He doesn't rebuke him. He meets him where he is. Why? In verse 29, Jesus blesses the Johannine community and many Christians who would come after them. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. This blessing unifies the early Christians and gives them a hope in the face of an uncertain and frightening future. Today, we need to read this blessing very differently. Why? Here's the main point of the sermon. If you take nothing else away, take this. There is a difference between an impoverished group of persecuted Christians relying on a confidently worded, unifying narrative to support each other through torture and death, and a 1,700-year-old civilization of Christian supremacy tied to unprecedented political power and wealth demanding blind faith and obedience from anyone who asks for evidence of their divine right to rule under threat not only of hellfire, but of political suppression and censorship. I will read that again. There is a difference between an impoverished group of persecuted Christians relying on a confidently worded narrative to support each other through torture and death, and a 1,700-year-old civilization of Christian supremacy tied to unprecedented political power and wealth, demanding blind faith and obedience from anyone who asks for evidence of their divine right to rule under threat not only of hellfire, but of political suppression and censorship. We are only 156 years removed from the Pope having his own army. Less than 1 month ago, the Defense Secretary of the United States led a worship service in the Pentagon, and in his prayer to his version of a Christian God said, "Let every round find its mark against the enemies of righteousness and our great nation. Give them wisdom in every decision, endurance for the trial ahead, unbreakable unity, and overwhelming violence of action against those who deserve no mercy." In the former, a group of people are refusing to cede unlimited political power and divine attributes to a Caesar and a government that had claimed them in the name of Rome. In the latter, a government has claimed unlimited political power and a divine mandate in the name of Christ. In the former, Thomas can be mildly chided for needing evidence to motivate him to oppose Rome and the vengeful synagogues. In the latter, Thomas is not only within his right, but arguably within obligation to ask questions and demand proof before kneeling before any throne and offering total allegiance. Thomas the doubter is not weak. He is wise. He is careful. In today's modern age, where power and religion threaten to blur into one, he is necessary. And before we give our trust, before we give our allegiance, before we kneel before anything, claiming authority in the name of God, someone has to ask, "Show me." I want to call you to the faith of Thomas this morning. I want to call you to the faith that is not the absence of questions, but the faith that remains when questions are taken seriously.